I got a phone call from my producer, and she said that she had found a case involving a kid who had a gun pointed at him during a raid. And I said, well, was it the right house? And she said, no, it was the wrong house. And I said, okay, what was it, one of those things where they just made a mistake? You know, maybe they got the wrong unit number, or somebody made a mistake in typing up the warrant. And she's like, well, we don't know yet, but it was the wrong house. Well, was he hurt? And she said, Dave, he had a gun pointed at him. And I said, oh, how old was he? She said, 9. I said, 9. And she said that they handcuffed his father, who was innocent, in front of him. And when I heard that, I thought, wow, I really didn't think about the perspective of what a child would go through in that situation. So I said, all right, let's go stop by and meet the family, and meet the child, and see if he wanted to talk about it. And that's pretty much how I ended up at Peter's doorstep. As soon as I got to the house, I wasn't even out of my car, and Peter was standing there at the front door with a big smile on his face with his little brother, Jack. And they're like, hi, Mr. Savini, I'm Peter, and I'm Jack. And they brought me right up, and they wanted me to meet their pet goldfish, Barry. So you could just see the innocence. These were just little kids, right? And then I got in the house, and I talked to Mom and Dad and Mr. and Mrs. Mendez, Peter and his brother, and Peter decided he wanted to do the interview, and with his little brother Jack by his side, and we did the interview.
So when you first got there and Peter was there, before you started actually talking to him about this, what was your sense of Peter? You know, what kind of kid? What impressed you about him?
Peter was like, he had this built-in smile on his face, and like he couldn't even look upset. It was very hard for him. Even when he talked about something that he didn't like, he had a smile. You could tell Mom and Dad were protective of the boys because they didn't really want them out on the street very much. You know, in the house they could protect them. So the house was a place where the kids felt safe. As I got to know Peter a little bit more during the interview, I realized that Peter had never talked about it. He had never talked about what happened that day. And when he started to go there, he got emotional. He got emotional, like a lot of the kids.
So this question's a little off the path. You met him, you were instantly kind of drawn to him in the magnetism. You're a dad. Were you kind of afraid to open this up with a child?
When you go into that situation where you're going to talk to a child about something that was very traumatic to them, you have to be ready to take that on yourself. There's a lot of responsibility there during that conversation. And so the way I looked at it, I felt like I had a duty to make sure Peter knew everything was okay, and that what he was doing was going to make things better, not just for him, but for other kids possibly one day. You know, Peter liked that. It gave Peter a sense of, Peter felt like he was, for the first time since that happened, the guns came roaring through the door. For the first time since that traumatic night, he was able to talk about it, and he was able to feel like he was going to do something about it. Kind of like fighting back. Kind of like taking control of a bad situation, turning a negative into a positive. What nobody knew was that Peter felt guilty about what happened that night. He felt like it was his responsibility because he couldn't protect his own brother. So, Peter ran. Peter ran when they knocked the door down. And he felt like because he ran, he abandoned his brother and left him behind. He saw guns, an assault rifle, and he ran to protect himself. And he felt bad about that. He wrote about it later and he shared it with me. He'd been exposed to this invasion of his house. Saw his father on the floor with handcuffs face down, assault rifle to his head, guns pointed at him and his brother and his mom. He doesn't know what's happening. I mean, he's on the floor screaming. He gets in the fetal position. His little brother, they're on the ground crying to get to their dad. And they can't because he's in the kitchen, handcuffed. They pick him up, they pick the dad up. And to make matters worse for Peter, they bring the dad into the living room, and now Peter can see him in handcuffs, right up and close and personal, right there, right in his face. So now he's seeing his dad in handcuffs on his wrists, hands behind his back, and they're screaming, you know, please don't take my daddy to jail. I don't want my daddy to go to jail, but they're screaming in these little innocent voices. And you start to understand the trauma of what happens when somebody tramples through your home and tramples over your rights. So Peter's life was pretty simple, as I said. It was his home, school, brother, mom, and dad. At that night, that simple life was compromised and changed forever.
The law is being signed tomorrow.
The law?
Yeah.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
He feels good that he spoke out. He feels good that they named a law after him.
The governor's signing it tomorrow.
I asked him,
Wow.
anybody else in your class have a law named after them? He couldn't believe it when I told him. It's one of the fun parts about the job because I got to surprise him. I got to surprise him that the law got passed. And that smile just went ear to ear.
And a law is being signed after your name to protect
So,
children in raid situations.
Peter is an amazing young individual.
Are you
He's very smart. He's very bright. He's lovable. He's kind. Peter wanted to be a police officer. He had an uncle who was a police officer. He was a police officer for Halloween. He looked up to police officers. And when that happened to him, it changed his entire image of what a police officer is.
So when you're thinking about Peter and his family and these other families who have been affected, traumatized, forever changed by these wrong raids, what do you feel? I mean, I know you're a professional and you're a reporter, but what kind of feelings, I mean, are you frustrated for them? Are you angry for them?
Well, you try to keep your cool about it, but it is kids. It involves kids. This investigation has been all about kids and innocent children. Like I said, their life, they have a pretty simple view of life. There's good and there's bad. They don't expect the guys in the uniform to be the bad ones or to be the ones that are coming into their homes with the guns drawn. You ask a question about frustration or anger, and I don't know if it's either one of those things. I think it's more, it's a hard thing to put your hand on because to get a grip on. Because none of this all these things could have been avoided. These are things that are avoidable. You don't want to put police in danger. You don't want to put innocent families in danger. So you really should know the house you're going into. If you go into the wrong house, bad things can happen to everybody. So it's a pretty important thing to nail down before you do it. And when you hear that happening over and over again, and you hear the stories of these children telling the same story over and over again about guns being pointed at them, you feel discouraged with the system.
So talking about the police's response or attitude about this. What happened when you?
So we'd been trying to get an answer from Superintendent Johnson for a long time. We wanted to sit down and talk to him, interview him about this, because it kept happening. And we weren't getting any answers. We weren't getting any records. So I go to his press conference, because it's the only way I'm going to get to ask him anything. I got to show up at a press conference about something else. And I show up, and I ask him, I said, can you tell me about all these wrong raids that are happening?
Can you talk with us about wrong raids? Do you know how many times they get it wrong?
I still don't have the records. It's been almost a year.
Yeah, I was going to say, so you've been on this investigation for a year. Is that the most frustrating part of it for you, the police's response or lack thereof?
It is frustrating when public officials, government agencies who are required by law to turn over records under the Freedom of Information Act refuse to turn them over. There is no transparency then. And if we as investigative journalists can't get the records to review and analyze, what does that say to the people? The citizens, aren't they allowed to see the records? Shouldn't they know how often a wrong raid happens? Shouldn't they know what the protocol is when it happens? How do you avoid making that happen again? You can go on the internet and look up a lot of this information. We have found the alleged bad guys that they're looking for within minutes after finding out about wrong raids. And we find out that it's the wrong house immediately. What are they doing? Are they really checking? And when they don't check, when they don't thoroughly check out to make sure it's the right home that they're going into, what happens to the officers and the supervisors that let that warrant slide through without double checking or triple checking? Nothing. We found no disciplinary action yet.
Have they particular instances, not even the overall, but in any one of these incidents where you've talked to them, have they said, well, it happened because?
Sometimes they get it wrong. Sometimes they just make a mistake. Sometimes the informants give them the wrong information.
No, I'm keeping this. I'm keeping this.
You keep it. Like I told you, that's what it was for.
No.
So when you ask them why it happens, they come up with an answer. Yeah, we make mistakes. It's a mistake. It's like a mistake. It's like making a mistake is making a wrong turn and you hear the GPS wrong. You know, you turn left, you should have turned right. A mistake is not getting a warrant, getting a judge to sign a warrant, telling a judge you checked everything out thoroughly, having your lieutenant sign off on it, having a state's attorney sign off it, and then a judge sign off on it, and then get a bunch of other colleagues of yours to suit up, SWAT team, other cops with guns, and kick down doors with battering rams and sledgehammers. That's not a mistake.